All right. Okay. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Megan Beckley. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the executive director for the Berea, Olmsted, and Beechwood Chambers of Commerce. And I also serve as executive director for the Collaborative Chamber Alliance, which is 20 chambers here around Northeast Ohio that collaborate together to put on joint events for small businesses and entrepreneurs in our area, like the Inclusion by Instinct series that you are participating in today. So thank you for joining us. Very happy to have you. I want to say thank you before we get into our discussion with our panelists this morning to our presenting sponsors who were able to help provide support for this series so that we could make it free and open to everyone from the community. So we want to say thank you very much to Baldwin Wallace University and to Cuyahoga Community College for their support. We appreciate you very much. With that, let's go ahead and jump into our topic for today. So the goal of Inclusion by Instinct is really to help small businesses, medium-sized businesses, entrepreneurs, working on kind of a bit of a smaller scale, understand how diversity, equity, and inclusion impacts them in that environment versus larger organizations where they have full HR teams dedicated to things like this. We're trying to look at this topic on a little bit of a smaller scale to look at how you can capture a diverse market as your customer, as a small business owner. So we have three really great panelists here today that represent a wide variety of industries and communities. I'm very excited to welcome them. Instead of reading their bios, I decided we're going to let them introduce themselves today, tell us a little bit about their professional or personal background, their experience kind of in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, just so you can get an idea of who you'll be hearing from today. So with that, I'm going to kick things off with Nolan Andersky, who is the head of DE&I marketing for North America at Avery Dennison. So Nolan, do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Megan. And hi, everyone. As Megan mentioned, my name is Nolan. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am the head of marketing for DE&I at Avery Dennison. I've worked in the DE&I space for probably about the last 3 or 4 years. Most recently, I was at Nestle where I led inclusive marketing. And what that kind of means is marketing to diverse consumer subsets as a part of our business to increase sales and revenue and kind of showcase the importance of minority groups and their buying power. At Avery Dennison, where I lead DE&I marketing, as Megan mentioned, we do have a full HR team dedicated to DE&I. Actually, by the end of this year, we'll have 6 individuals focused in the DE&I space in different functions. My role in terms of marketing is taking those DE&I strategies and disseminating them both internally and externally where we live and work to kind of showcase how we're bringing about change and creating an inclusive environment. Outside of my professional life, I'm very proud to serve on the board of a couple of organizations here in Northeast Ohio, some of those being PFLAG Cleveland, the Cleveland State University Alumni Association Board of Directors, and LGBTQ+ Lorain County. I'm super excited to be here and kind of chat with all of you today. Thank you so much again, Megan.
Great. Thank you for being here. All right, with that, let's move over to Kathy Belk. You want to say hello to everyone?
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be here today, particularly with these wonderful panelists. My background is first, I started my career in large Fortune 500 companies. I worked for Procter & Gamble, I worked for Coca-Cola, I worked for Bank of America. But then I have spent the last 15 years of my career here in Greater Cleveland, particularly working with or serving in a leadership role at a small or medium-sized business. So I worked just over a decade at Jumpstart, which is a nonprofit which works with small growing companies. And now today I lead a foundation and we're a team of 3. So our foundation team is a small team. I'm certainly not an expert in the issues of DE&I, particularly not compared to Magda and Nolan. But I am really committed to the principles. I've spent a lot of time learning myself, and I do try to implement those within the construct of the small team that I have and in the work that I do every day. So I'm really interested to not only learn from my fellow panelists, but to discuss these issues with all of you. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you for being here. And finally, let's move over to Dr. Magda Gomez, who is the Executive Director for Diversity and Inclusion at Cuyahoga Community College.
Good morning, Megan, and good morning, Kathy and Nolan. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this panel. Certainly grateful to be invited to this table. So yeah, I'm actually, as you said, working for Cuyahoga Community College. I've been in the role of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Executive Director for a little over 6 years now, although I have been working at the college for 10. Prior to this role, I was in the marketing department. I was handling enrollment marketing for the college, which was a great opportunity for me to get a very good experience in learning all of the functions of the college across the board, because as you know, we're a multi-campus system. And so happy to say that in this role, I'm able to support our employees through diversity, equity, and inclusion professional development. It's important, especially as you consider the classroom environment, but also our strong partnerships in our community as well. And I also help internally with our employee resource groups. We currently have 5, providing support in any which way that I can through executive sponsorship, encouraging programming and engagement. And as you know, during the pandemic, that was a huge need for our employees to feel that sense of camaraderie and social engagement. Additionally, I do help support efforts at the college as it pertains to ensuring that we continue to be an inclusive institution all across the board, understanding that our students come to us from all walks of life and specific needs in their learning. And so I'm grateful to be able to work in that space, supporting our student resource groups, helping to support especially moving toward becoming an even more LGBTQ plus best practices institution, ensuring that our Black American Council and Hispanic Council and Veterans Services and Student Accessibility Services, those just to name a few, are heavily supported in ensuring that they are able to provide the support that's necessary for our students to succeed. So thanks again for inviting me.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you to each of you for sharing a little bit about your background, just so we have an idea of who we're hearing from today. And you all certainly have a very diverse range of professional and personal experience. So I think it'll be great to hear from each of your individual perspectives on some of the things we're going to discuss today. So with that, I want to mention, so Inclusion by Instinct is a 5-part series. This is the first, and really the goal of today is to kind of have a little bit more of a high-level discussion on DE&I and how it sort of plays a role, again, in the small business space. The subsequent 4 sessions that will happen after this are going to dive a little bit more into some specific diverse communities. So in our next session, we'll be looking at the LGBTQ community. Then we'll be looking at people with disabilities. We will be looking at the BIPOC, that's Black, Indigenous, and people of color community. And then finally, women. And those will be again, some great panel discussions with folks that are representing those different communities. But for today, we're going to keep things a little bit more high level and just kind of understand a little bit more about what DE&I actually means. So with that, let's dive into some questions here. And for the folks that are in attendance today, and again, I know we're live streaming, so I believe the rooms that are doing that have a facilitator there. If you do have any questions for any of our panelists, please feel free to use the Q&A function. You're also welcome to send a chat. If you want to ask a question anonymously, you can send it just to myself as the host, and I will be happy to read that for you, and we can just keep it anonymous if you would rather do it that way. So please feel free to use those functions throughout the event today. I'm happy to pause and take any questions as we move through our topics. All right, so with that, Kathy, let's kick things off with you. So can you tell us kind of in your experience, what DE&I actually means to you? I know there is some confusion, especially around the word diversity, and there's a lot of politicization around that word. Can you tell us a little bit about what it kind of means to you, and especially in the small business world and the entrepreneurs that you've worked with, how you kind of see it play out in that environment?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I think it's funny. My view on this is maybe going to be a little more practical. So I'm really interested, obviously, in Nolan and Magna to also course correct in the event that my interpretation needs some fleshing out. But I always think of DE&I to mean a couple different things. First, diversity. I think of diversity relative to groups of people. not a person. I don't think there's such a thing as a diverse person. But I think when you think about a group, when I think about the team at the foundation that I lead, or when I think about the board at our foundation, I'm looking for a diverse group, meaning a group with people with differences. So to me, diversity is differences within groups of people. And that is difference by age, difference by race, difference by gender, difference by sexual orientation, difference by professional background, difference from skill. There's all these different levers related to what those differences can look like. And then for my foundation, there's certain types of differences that are more important to us, meaning some of the different kinds of technical backgrounds or lived experiences are really important, that we have that great diversity across that group of people. So the idea of diversity is then different than inclusion, the I part, DE&I, because I think of inclusiveness as being an environment or a culture in that group of people, whether that's the team or the board or other people I work with, where everybody is comfortable and able to bring that difference to the work in a way that makes the work better. So it's creating an environment that is truly welcoming to everybody, so that those differences really help us drive our work forward. I mean, that's I think, most critical part for me, is that it improves the work that we're doing together.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Magda, let's go over to you with the same question.
Yes, thank you, Megan. Interesting perspective from Kathy, thinking of it in terms of groups. And I could see, based on the way you described it, it does make sense. I like to think of it a little bit different, because when you consider individuals, we bring so many layers. We're so multifaceted, right? We're not representing just one identity. And it's one of the things that we're constantly talking about at the college and in our programming, to ensure that everyone understands diversity beyond race and ethnicity, for example, which typically that's the common answer from folks when you ask them what that means. It's more than that. It's also, considering elements of socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds, as well as lifestyles and experiences and interests. And I think that's important when you consider the work environment, even in the small business setting, understanding that it's important to invite people who have different experiences to the table, because it's so important to encourage creativity and innovation. Especially in the environment that we're currently in, that we're needing to reinvent, right, to adapt to the current learning styles in the case of higher ed, of our students and the needs that they have, but also in the workforce in general. It's important that we consider the inclusion side of things. We like to say diversity, and I'm sure you've heard this before, is like inviting people to the party, and inclusion is inviting them to dance. Because once you bring them together, folks from the different backgrounds and identities, it's important to engage them and help them feel that they are valued, and that their perspectives are in fact valued. And we can talk about this a little more, but it's important that you have diverse perspectives, especially in a team environment, to ensure that you prevent groupthink, which is easy to do. And you tend to fall into this status quo environment when you're not inviting, again, diversity of thought. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And yes, I have lots more questions to dive into this much deeper as we go here. So we'll just give them a little teaser for now, I guess. All right, Nolan, let's go to you. Same question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Magda and Kathy, I would echo their sentiments, and not too much to add. And Avery Dennison, DE&I, to us, our kind of slogan or tagline around it is every voice, every day. And what we mean by that is that whether you are our chief executive officer, or you are a day 2, third shift manufacturing employee with 48 hours of experience at our organization, DE&I is a part of your journey here. And it's important to the organization as well. And that's where we kind of get to that place of diverse thoughts. And as Magda mentioned, inviting everyone to the party, and then inviting them to dance, because we do want DE&I to be disseminated throughout the organization, and a passion point and a conversation topic or a meeting agenda item that everyone is living. And I think too, what's really interesting of being a larger organization is we have that ability where we have different operations, not only globally, but all over the United States. So we already have an advantage in DE&I to get diverse thinking and create an inclusive environment. It's just ensuring that we're practicing that too, whether that's diverse slates in our interview panels, leadership, having diversity, pay equity as well. And just really quickly, obviously equity too, in our eyes and in my eyes personally, is ensuring fairness and fair treatment, whether it's working conditions, pay, seats at the table, or just open spaces for people to express their own concerns and how they're feeling, or their ideas too. So I would say totally agree with Kathy and Magda, and just adding a few points of color from the Avery Dennison lens.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's jump into some of the terms that we're talking about here when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's also a couple of other terms that people might hear. So DE&I and B, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. You may hear JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So there's a couple of different acronyms surrounding, this particular topic. I wonder if we could dive into a little bit between the differences between some of these words. And we've talked a little bit about the differences already, as Magda mentioned, between diversity and between inclusion. But I wonder if we could talk a little bit about sort of equality, equity, and justice, and kind of how those terms sort of play out, not only on a social level, but, as we also think about in a business context as well. So Magda, I'm going to start with you. If you could help folks just kind of understand beyond diversity and inclusion, and we look at some of those kind of farther down the line steps that we're sort of, shooting for with DE&I efforts, if we could talk about some of those terminologies. So particularly, I'm trying to focus on equality, equity, and justice, and sort of what those concepts mean.
Yes, thank you, Megan. It's interesting because it's one of the things that we are currently including in all of our workshops and programming at the college, especially when you consider the gender equity these days. We talk about that a lot. I always use the image of, and I don't know if you've seen the image, I wish I had it in front of me right now to show you, of the young adults attending a ball game. And so you've got on one side, they're all able to attend, but not all of them are able to see over the fence. And then the other image that's adjacent to it, you have those accommodations that are necessary to ensure that they all have an equal view. And so when you consider equity and equality, oftentimes people don't know that there is a distinction, but there is. And, equality is important. We certainly want to ensure that everyone has an equal opportunity to work, for example, at the same level. But it's important when you consider equity to ensure that you strive to eliminate whatever barriers are in place in order to prevent full participation in this case. So using an example for folks who have a disability, are there wheelchair ramps available? Is there accessibility for them from a physical standpoint? When you consider those disabilities that are not visible, looking at your website, are you putting technology in place so that you ensure that all audiences are able to equally view your message? Those are just some examples. From a justice and social justice perspective, it's really ensuring that you're removing that inequity. An example to include, for example, preferred name options and gender identification for your employees, so that they in fact could feel welcomed and included in being a part of your overall organization. It's really more about, and we will talk about this further, intentionality, right? What are we doing beyond saying that we are inclusive and that we are equitable? What are the actionable things that we're doing? And so again, those are just my initial thoughts in terms of those three terms.
Great, thank you. Nolan, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Sure thing. Yeah, I think the most important, or one of the most important steps around those other terms, is recognizing that there are inequalities that exist. We have this opportunity space that we can create change, whether it's at a small, medium, or large size business. So first of all, recognizing the fact that there are inequities or injustices maybe even in your own organization that you can address head on using different resources or external partners, but just in identifying that those inequities do exist. The other thing too that I think is extremely important from a small, medium-sized business or any business that has a storefront or a location where people can buy your goods and services, showcasing your inclusive support only helps drive business forward if you're methodical in it. And what I mean by that is, if you are looking at supporting Pride Month, if you put a pride flag outside of your business, and then all of a sudden, show no other support other than putting that flag out, it just feels a little bit like you're doing it for the pomp and circumstance. And I think it's important to note that inequities don't just happen during a Heritage Month, they happen all year. So as a smaller, medium-sized business, I think you have an amazing opportunity to create partnerships within your community where you're passionate too. Having that ownership seat of a business, I think it's important that you can't do everything. So you really should not pick and choose necessarily, but identify what's important to you and harness that opportunity space to create long-lasting partnerships. Then ultimately, we know increase sales. Might not be right away, but in the long term, it does increase sales and increase your visibility as a business as an inclusive partner.
Great, thank you. Kathy, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Maybe I'll just compliment what I love Nolan just talking about there about the external opportunities. Internally, my experience leading a business is that it's very easy to be equal. Like everybody has the opportunity to go to X training, or everybody gets the same benefits opportunities. So treating everybody equally is what I think is typical practice. Equity is giving people what they need to be most successful in their job. People need different things. I mean, I think we all see this even just within our families. So it means some people you're providing different resources to than others. And I think that's particularly as businesses scale, that becomes harder and harder because people are all individuals. So I think that's where the expertise and the ideas of folks like Magda and Nolan, who can really help all of us think about how you treat individuals individually and give them what they need to be the best performers that they can be in your environment. It's why it's so helpful to have those experts like that. And then, justice I see as the system that enables that equity. So it's not just a one-off thing, it's actually embedded in everything that you do.
Awesome, thank you. All right. Well, I love the reference that Magda made to this graphic, and I tried to put a link to an example of one. There's a few different versions of this, but essentially, people trying to watch this baseball game and the fence sort of being the barrier and the visual representation of how these different words play out. It's such a simple way to illustrate kind of the differences between some of these concepts. So thank you for mentioning that, Magda. And I hope the one I dropped in the chat is in the realm of what you were going for. I know there's a couple of different ones, but at least gives folks the idea of what you were referencing there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. This is a term that some folks may have heard of, but maybe they aren't sure exactly what it is, or maybe some folks are experiencing it themselves, or perhaps with other folks on their team. And I wonder if we could talk a little bit about what exactly it is and some strategies to overcome it. So Magda, I'd love to start with you.
Thanks, Megan. You're right. We've all been hearing imposter syndrome a lot lately. I think that it's important to elevate the understanding of what that is, because I think all of us at some point we must have experienced it. And I want to point to someone who I most recently read her book. Her name is Dr. Valerie Young. She's like the expert, the authority on the subject. In fact, I think she did her dissertation study on imposter syndrome. And so she really sheds some light on the importance of understanding and overcoming imposter syndrome. And for those of you who don't know what that means, it essentially, the way it's defined, it's this persistent doubt that we might feel about our own abilities and accomplishments, and this fear of being found out as being imposters, right? Oftentimes it's of folks thinking about Maybe I don't deserve that promotion. Maybe I don't deserve those accolades. I'm a fraud, so to speak, which is really weird to think about, especially when you're, trying to really move up the career ladder and being, recognized as a leader in all of the things that you do. But it's real and it needs to be acknowledged. And it's okay to even identify the fact that you might even have experienced it. I think what we're learning from research is that more and more women experience it more so than men. In fact, what we learn is like 70% of the population has experienced imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. And I think when you consider how to overcome it, I think it's important to learn and certainly read Dr. Valerie Young's book, and she has some TED Talks too that are really great. Engage your teams in discussions about it, because it's important that they know that they're not alone. So one of the ways to overcome it is understanding that you're not alone in this imposter syndrome environment, that people who are in fact been notable beyond celebrities, there's also folks that are very well known in our corporate world. For example, Sheryl Sandberg, she's a former COO of Facebook, and she is someone who Dr. Valerie Young mentions as having experienced imposter syndrome. So it's real, and it's okay to seek out help, either from a friend or a mentor, and talk it through and really validate your concerns, but I'll also understand that you are valued and that your experiences are valued, and that oftentimes, you will get a compliment from someone for doing something valuable and good, and say thank you. Don't brush it off as luck or that perhaps they're just being nice. You truly deserve that compliment. And so, no one enters into a work environment knowing everything. I think it's important that you understand that. You need to really play into your strengths and continue to learn what you're intended to do, and own up to it. Imposter syndrome is something that I think all of us need to learn and acknowledge and just overcome it. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And as a lesson, I have learned recently to say thank you when people provide compliments instead of brushing them off. And I will tell you, it is very fulfilling to just take a compliment and let it actually soak in. It kind of feels nice. So thank you. And I did drop a link in the chat for everybody to a website that has a lot of information about Dr. Young's work. She really is amazing. She does have some wonderful TED Talks, and there's a lot of links to some of the resources about her work on the link in the chat if anybody's interested in looking into that. All right, with that, Nolan, did you have anything you wanted to add to this subject?
Sure, just really quickly, I think it's interesting around, especially working in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. Imposter syndrome is very prevalent because it is, I don't want to say it's impossible to be every minority group, because maybe there is someone that identifies across all of those different groups, but it's very rare. So I think that we face in the DE&I space sometimes imposter syndrome of how can I be best suited to drive issues forward for our Black African American employees when I don't identify that way. And I think some of the opportunity space around allyship and intersectionality comes to play here. You don't have to necessarily be a part of a group to help drive it forward or help kind of, be an advocate or a supporter. And so I think sometimes working the DE&I space, we do experience that imposter syndrome of thinking, well, what is my place here? What is my space here? And I think that taking that step back and understanding that allyship is what's kind of helping drive, a lot of initiatives forward can kind of help in that space too.
Right, it's a really great point. Thank you. Kathy, let's go to you. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yes, I'm really looking forward to reading Dr. Young's book, because this is a topic I don't totally understand. But I would say, based on my thinking and what I've been listening to this morning, some of the things that you probably do, businesses do today or can do more, can be helpful, because sometimes it's being thoughtful and courteous and inviting people in, that creating that inclusive environment that can be one antidote to people feeling like they're imposters. For example, invite people to sit at the big table. Sometimes there's a table and there's like 5 people at the table, and then people sit in the chairs around the table because they don't feel like they have a voice that's important enough to be at the big table. Invite people to sit at the big table, or make sure when you're having small talk that you're not just talking about the things that you and your best work friend are talking about. Think about other ways, ask questions. These are just courteous things that lots of people do every day, but that's about helping people to belong. And as somebody who doesn't know if somebody's feeling like an imposter, these are the ways that you're inviting them in and making them feel like they are part of your team. And that's one thing that you can do to enable them to be more comfortable.
Right. Literally inviting them to the table, metaphorically and literally. All right, I want to pause for just a moment. I had a question come in through an anonymous question come in through the chat here that I wanted to insert here before we continue on with some of our pre-planned agenda here for today. So this person is asking, how can I help my organization understand that DE&I is about more than just race? I wonder if anybody would be interested in tackling that question. I'll leave it open to the panelists for your thoughts.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in about this, and thanks for the question. Most certainly, it's important to note that diversity, as we mentioned earlier, it goes beyond race. And you're right. Like, how do you, especially with small businesses, because it's hard sometimes to introduce diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies when you have smaller groups of individuals. And if they're not diverse from a race and gender perspective, what do you do, right? So beyond, working towards diversifying your workforce, most certainly, working with your existing teams to say, let's encourage opportunities for engagement of people pertaining to age and family status, for example, their current environment and location in which they live. There's ways to work toward inclusivity, right? And I mentioned earlier, diverse perspectives are important, bringing in diversity of thought, ideas that could help support inclusivity at your organization. And so those are just some initial thoughts, because I know oftentimes, once again, people just think about race. I mentioned earlier that it's not just race, it's all the identities. Intersectionality is real. We bring diversity into the work environment from different aspects. We are so multifaceted. We all have different experiences, and those things need to be validated. Sometimes it's engaging in conversations, real conversations with our team members to help them, be able to, again, be themselves, feel that sense of belonging. If you're able to create an employee resource group based on identities, that would be amazing, because that helps your employees, once again, collaborate with their members that share same identities. For example, there's this sense of camaraderie that comes through with that, and they feel, once again, welcomed at your place of work and valued and validated for who they are.
Great, thank you. Kathy or Nolan, did you have anything you wanted to add before we
Maybe I'll just add one little thing. So a couple of years ago, in the role that I'm in today, like, we were a 3-person team of 3 white women who all were essentially about the same age and had about the same family status. And so we would often use a trick, which was, when we're making a decision, we'd say, well, whose perspective matters in this decision who's not here? We would just ask that question. Sometimes it's, would be really great to get a younger person's perspective. Sometimes we'd say it'd be really great to get a person of color's perspective. Sometimes we'd say it would be really great to get the perspective of somebody who's actually studied this, as opposed to us who've practiced it. So the answer was never the same. And I think that's how we seed that view, that diversity comes in many different forms, not just one form. So just asking that question of, like, what other perspective isn't here that could help us make a stronger decision?
Great.
I
Thank you.
love that. And building really quickly on, especially what Kathy was just mentioning, I think if you're in this smaller business setting where you maybe have a handful of employees, look externally. How does DE&I matter to your customer base? How does it matter to your supplier base, your partners? The other thing too is that a really, in my opinion, a really easy way to make sure DE&I is understood outside of just race is creating DE&I pillars or goals for your organization, where you can flat out say it's, ensuring Black, African American, Latinx are important. We have benefits that cover our same-sex couple employees. We have, et cetera, right? I could go on, but it's set out what the goals are and make sure they're very explicit, not just around race. I think that's a really easy way to ensure your organization understands that it is more than that too.
Can I just add, thank you for that, Nolan, because it just made me think about when most organizations, including my own, we build goals for ourselves, performance goals each year. And one of the goals that all of us are charged with including is an inclusivity goal. And all of our employees have the opportunity to select what they would like to do for that fiscal year. We offer a ton of ideas, and some of them similar to what you mentioned, Nolan. But we want to make sure we encourage our employees to do based on where they are in their environment, because everyone, especially with Tri-C being 3,000 employees, everyone is at a different level. What does that mean for you? Does it mean you do something simply as create an opportunity for a book discussion on a topic around a diversity topic, and host conversations around that? It could mean mentoring someone like a student who needs your help in any one of our resource group areas. It could mean mentoring an employee. It could mean serving on a committee. Like we have a multitude of committees moving toward race and social justice and gender equity. Serving on that committee, taking what you've learned and putting it into practice. So it goes beyond attending that training. What are you going to do with what you've learned? Putting it into practice. It's that call to action that must be included in everything that we do. So I just thought of that because I said, it's just one of the things that we continually push at our institution, and making sure that our employees feel supported while they're doing that too.
Great, thank you. Anything else before we move into our next subject here? All right, okay. Well, thank you. I think this is a good point to pivot and sort of starts to move into where Nolan was headed in some of his remarks here with kind of moving away from sort of what DE&I is. And now let's take a look at some actionable steps, especially that small business owners can take in terms of how they can actually let DE&I play out in terms of their capturing their customer base. So can we talk a little bit about some recommendations here? So how, especially thinking in maybe a small or medium-sized business environment, how a business or an entrepreneur can be an effective and participatory ally, even if they're not a member of an actual diverse community. So if they're not a person of color, if they're not part of the LGBTQ community. So for example, we're in Hispanic Heritage Month right now. How could a business, a small business, for example, be a participatory and effective ally versus a performative ally in a way that they could present their business as one that is open and affirming to different types of communities? So Nolan, why don't we start with you on that one?
Sure thing. I think I've spent the entire 90 minutes plus talking about ways businesses can be inclusive and kind of informative towards different groups. But just a couple of examples, I think, is especially when you have the opportunity of a storefront or a brick and mortar location, just creating, marketing materials that showcase either support or safe spaces for those different groups, I think is a great way to kind of be inclusive of different minority groups. The other thing too is finding external partnerships can be really important too, of showcasing that, we're an annual partner, we're a supportive partner, we're a table partner, whatever that may be, whatever your business is comfortable with. but showcasing support in the community, I think, is a great way to kind of invite those diverse groups in too.
Great, thank you. How about Magda? Let's go over to you.
Yeah, I like that. I understand that with small businesses, sometimes you don't have the resources to be able to go above and beyond. But just as Nolan said, you need to think about leveraging opportunities that are available in our community. Hispanic Heritage Month certainly is upon us right now. There are also, many other opportunities to celebrate culture and diversity. Leverage what's going on in your community. Invite your employees to maybe attend things in the community as a group, for example, and then come back and talk about it. What have you learned? What we want to do as a team, as an organization moving forward from what we learned. It speaks volumes when you go above and beyond. And people do need to understand that beyond, standing behind things and posting that message on social media, what are you actually doing in terms of actionably doing steps toward becoming an ally, actively participating in things that encourage solidarity. So, and that could mean, as the example that was given, when you consider the LGBTQ plus population, are you marching in the parade? I really loved attending Pride this past summer when I saw so many organizations that were together wearing their t-shirts representing that organization and marching and supporting the LGBTQ plus community and creating awareness, for that population of folks. So those are just some examples.
And I think, Nolan, what you mentioned earlier too, thinking about how you can put some of those into practice. So for example, if you're picking out a healthcare policy for your employees, is it inclusive of same-sex partners or just domestic partners of any gender? Does it have trans inclusive healthcare for your trans, if you have trans employees or non-binary employees? So a couple of things like that you could actually put those things into practice among your own employee base. Kathy, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Maybe the only thing, in addition to these really good ideas, is just continue to focus on education of your team. I think this is one of the hardest things, because to be truly performative, you have to be trusted by the communities you're supporting. You don't get to decide if you're trusted. They decide to trust you. So I think the best way is just continually talk about these issues, as Magda was saying, continually experience them, continually educate everybody about them. Because then I think everybody's individual and your team's collective behavior is going to be more inclusive, and you'll start building that kind of trust with these with the populations you want to support.
Yeah, great, thank you. So can we talk a little bit about, we've talked a little bit about some examples of things that businesses might be able to do. And we mentioned a couple of times leveraging external partnerships. So I wonder if you all might be able to provide some recommendations for resources, whether they're local here in Northeast Ohio or on a broader scale, where folks who are, again, small, business owners, entrepreneurs, et cetera, could go, or if they're just professionals who are looking, professional development or connection opportunities, but some resources where folks could go to, I guess, learn more about specific communities, connect with specific communities, and perhaps learn about how they could leverage some of those external partnerships, perhaps in communities that, if you're a small business owner, maybe that's not a community that you personally are a part of. So for example, if you're a white business owner, but you're trying to be a more participatory ally or affirming business to people of color, what are some different resources and organizations you could get connected with here at the local level? So whether that be ones that you've worked with professionally, ones you're involved with personally, if you have any recommendations for those types of organizations. So Nolan, let's start with you.
Sure thing. Yeah, I think, this is going to sound very, I don't know if the right word is like crass, but honestly, Google is a really great place to start. And just by Googling, organizations around a specific topic or minority group, I think that's a great start to understand what's around you. Another great resource is exactly, Megan, what you're leading, our chambers of commerce. Chambers have great partnerships with businesses and civic and community-based organizations in a community. And if you're trying to, as a small and medium or even large size business, if you're trying to make an impact in your community, starting with a chamber who has those connection points is a great place, because I think if you are a small or medium-sized business, the impact you make in your immediate local community is going to be far more vast than a community 50, 100, or 1,000 miles away from national organizations. Not saying that national organizations don't do amazing work locally, but there's so many local organizations that you can get involved with too. And I think too, just reaching out to different organizations. One thing that organizations love is talking about their organization. And maybe it's not the right fit for you, but understanding directly from a firsthand experience can help you kind of identify which are opportunity spaces that you either want to put people resources or monetary resources. And that's the other thing too, I'll just end on, is I think as a smaller medium-sized business, sometimes they're deterred by the cost of entry to, for example, the Human Rights Campaign. If you went to their Cleveland-based dinner and wanted to support with a table, that's a $3,000 investment. To a large size organization, that's a rounding error in a budget. A small, medium-sized business, that's a lot of money. But there's a lot of ways to get involved that don't require monetary donations or support, but just people support. Maybe it's a day of giving or a day of service, and you're volunteering at the Cleveland Food Bank with your team. Great team building, great way to make an impact. And there's a lot of organizations that have that opportunity space to get involved from a people resource, not just a monetary resource. So I would say start with Google, start with your Chamber of Commerce, and then even also too, really quickly, speak to your employees. I work at Avery Dennison, but outside of Avery Dennison, I sit on and support different local organizations. If Avery Dennison asked me what's a great organization to get involved with LGBTQ plus community, I can name 3 offhand because I'm involved and passionate about it. So chat with your employees and chat with your chambers of commerce and look.
Okay, thank you. All right, how about Kathy? Let's go over to you.
I really like what Nolan said. So the only thing maybe I'd add is I did attend a training since I was talking about education being so important, I attended a training that I think changed my life and I think has changed thousands of people's lives in Cleveland since it's been brought here. It's called the Groundwater Training. It's a half a day. It's virtual. So it's really easy. It costs $200. And it's sponsored by a group here called Third Space Action Lab. This is racial equity oriented. So that's its focus. And the reason many people have found it very powerful is because it is data-based. So if you are a business team and you are trying to understand issues of racial equity or racial injustice and are looking for a more data-oriented approach to demonstrate something, I found this to be really relevant. When I did it 7 years ago, I immediately asked my entire board and my entire team to participate because I found it a very different way of learning about it and a very compelling way of learning about it. Third Space Action Lab is the local partner who sponsors that.
Okay, hopefully I put the right link in the chat there. Try to do some quick Googling while y'all are talking here. All right. Okay, great. So what about and Nolan, I think you were leading into this, which is great. And of course, I'm always going to be an advocate for chambers of commerce. And they are a wonderful space, especially here in Cleveland. We are very, very fortunate to have several really amazing chambers who are working specifically with diverse communities. So we have Plexus, which is our LGBT and allied Chamber of Commerce, which is a part of our Collaborative Chamber Alliance. So we do a lot of work with them, and they're a wonderful organization. We have the Northeast Ohio Hispanic Business Center and the Greater Hispanic Chamber. So they are a chamber of commerce here, a very large presence that's working with the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx community. We also have the President's Council, which is our African American chamber here for Northeast Ohio. We have organizations like NAWBO, which is the National Alliance of Women Business Owners. I could go on and on, but there are lots of these very specific organizations that work with these different diverse communities. There's also different organizations doing work with folks in the disability community, and that being physical disabilities, the neurodiverse community, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about any recommendations you have for small business owners, again, as I mentioned, who maybe if you're a small business owner or you're a member of a small business who isn't necessarily a member of that particular community. So say you are not a member of the LGBTQ community, but you want to be a supportive ally of that community, and you want your business to be one that can service that community. Can you provide some advice for folks who may feel intimidated to get involved with one of those types of organizations or some of the resources that y'all have mentioned if they're not actually a member of that community? And just kind of talking about how allyship can kind of play out in that situation. So just any tips or advice you have to get involved with an organization that's supporting a community that's diverse that maybe you're not personally actually a member of. So I'll throw that out to anybody who might like to give some thoughts on it.
Yeah, this is Magda. So just as Nolan said earlier, people do like to talk about, organizations like to talk about what they do. It's okay to reach out. If you don't feel comfortable reaching out by phone directly, cold calling an organization, many organizations have on their websites opportunities for involvement, whether it's volunteering, whether it's just reaching out to help support through donation. But make that contact. It's okay, because that's what they're there for. I do want to give a plug to the college, because we do have a really great speakers bureau that is also listed on our website. Anyone is welcome to join the speakers bureau as well, but you could just essentially go in there, complete a form, let us know, what you're looking for specifically, what topics, the dates that you are interested in, and we have dedicated staff that will reach back out to you. And so that is not, anything that you have to pay for, right? It's a service to our community. So take advantage of that. What was not mentioned is the diversity center. We have a diversity center, a great diversity center in our community. They do great workshops. I think maybe working with small businesses to make it affordable in some way. I'm sure if you worked with Peggy Zone-Fisher, who's amazing, and other organizations, even the LGBT Center, they're really great and welcoming in terms of opportunities to reach out and help support others, especially to get people understanding what it means to be diverse. So think about those things. And I wanted to answer your question too. I got lost in the offering those recommendations. What was your initial question?
We were talking about just advice for folks who want to get involved with some of these organizations that are supporting a community that they're not necessarily a part of personally.
Yeah. So once again, give people a call. They want to know that you're interested. They want to be able to engage you. So don't hesitate to make that call or reach out via their website as well.
I think that's the first step of being a participatory ally, is just raising your hand and saying, hello, I'm interested and would like to learn more about this community. So it's a great first step. Nolan or Kathy, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
The only thing I would add super quickly is that I think in allyship, the old saying, ignorance is bliss, is really applicable. If an organization approaches a group thinking that they know what is best or how to help them, I think it would be met with a lot of resistance. By just being open-minded and understanding that you don't know the best way to get involved, but you want to be an ally, I think that would be welcome. That type of verbiage would be welcome with open arms and create a really strong foundation for an allyship partnership.
Great, thank you. I did drop a link in the chat for the Tri-State Speakers Bureau. They are wonderful. We use them as chambers to find speakers for events all the time, and they have a lot of really amazing speakers on the DE&I subject and many other subjects, economy, I mean, you name it, they have a speaker that can talk to you, and it is free of charge. It's a wonderful service. So I put a link in the chat to that. I also wanted to mention too, Magda, I want to give a shout out to Tri-C. You guys have some amazing certificate programs in diversity, equity, and inclusion, where if folks are interested in getting a little bit more formal training on DE&I, could you talk a little bit about some of the programs that are available if folks want a little bit more of a formalized education around it?
Absolutely, Megan. Thank you for saying that. Yes, through our corporate college, we do offer diversity, equity, and inclusion training and a certificate program. And all of the subjects that typically fall under diversity, equity, and inclusion, addressing issues of unconscious bias, microaggressions, different strategies for hiring and mitigating bias in hiring. There's all sorts of different topics. Most certainly everything is available on our website. So do reach out. And again, corporate college is who offers that.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, and then we had another question come in through the chat here to me that I'd like to read. And we kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe not directly. So this person is essentially asking, they're interested in posting things to their social media, for example, for their business to celebrate different cultural events that may be taking place, but they're afraid that it will be seen as a political gesture and how that may negatively impact their business. Do you have any advice for folks who are unfortunately worried that posting, for example, about Pride Month will present their business in a way that they, certain people might feel is political for somebody who's trying to remain apolitical when it comes to, their business environment? Any tips or advice you have for navigating that process as a small business owner? And I'll throw that out to anybody who might want to answer. I know it's a tough question.
I think it is a really tough question. And I think oftentimes small and medium-sized businesses that rely on customers in their community, it can create a polarizing environment. I think that it's important to be true to yourself as a business owner and true to your employee base. And again, not to use an age-old saying, but you're not going to make everyone happy. But if you can close your business doors every night and know that you made an impact on someone in the community by being an ally or promoting a diverse cause, I think that speaks more volumes to whom you are as a business owner and a business. And I think also too, again, it might not be immediate, but I'm not just making these statistics up, but there are very, very valid statistics that are tried and true that showcase allyship and inclusivity as a business have long-term effects and results in the positive direction for your bottom line. So if it's a business decision, unless you're a nonprofit, a business decision, you want to be making money and you want to be increasing your profits, and being inclusive and a supporter of diverse groups is a really, really great way to do that. So I can't promise you won't receive backlash from 1 to 2 community members, but I would be willing to bet that the praise you would receive would be tenfold that. So negative voices tend to be the loudest, but they also, I think, can be quieted by support from those that are in support of what you're attempting to do. So I would just say remain true to, if for some reason, whatever belief you have makes you against a diverse group, then don't support that group. You have to be true to yourself as a business owner, but it's okay to start somewhere and then just build upon that in partnerships and relationships with the community.
Great, thank you. Yeah, somebody dropped in the chat here, human rights aren't political would be my answer. Either you commit to your values or you worry about what others think. So sounds similar to kind of what Nolan is saying about being true to yourself as a business owner, for sure. Magda, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think Nolan really hit all the key points. You really just have to be open, and if you're truly going to be true, just as Nolan said, to your beliefs and your values as an organization, it's important to be courageous and put yourself out there.
Thank you. Kathy, anything else before we move into our kind of final question here?
Social media is tricky in general. So I think follow your typical social media protocol, which can include, always being positive or not responding to trolls, those kinds of things, I think, the things you would typically do in responding to people who don't say great things on social media. Obviously, if you've got those identified, then you can be more confident in taking these steps forward.
And I'll just mention from personal experience. So like Nolan, I'm involved in several LGBTQ organizations here in Cleveland. And when I see a business post something in support of the LGBTQ community, I'm not necessarily, avid to go write a comment to say, thank you so much for posting this. This is wonderful, whatever. But it does stick in my brain when I'm thinking about whose business I'm going to patronize. That's likely going to be one that I would rather give my money to than one who I haven't seen be supportive of a community that, I'm passionate about. So I think those are things where it's hard to maybe measure the tangible effects that you're having. And yes, certainly there could be people who have negative things to say about whatever it is that you're trying to support. But I do think, like Nolan and several of the panelists have mentioned, that the positive effects, whether you can see them immediately or not, can certainly be much greater than any negative backlash that you may receive from a couple of folks who have something to say.
Well, and Megan, I'll just reinforce what Nolan and Magda have both said, which is there are hundreds of studies that prove that there are both external benefits and internal benefits to doing these kinds of things. There's hundreds of studies.
Well, that is a perfect segue, because the last question I'd like to ask to our panelists before we wrap up today is, let's talk a little bit about the bottom line. So I've heard several people in the DE&I subject who are talking to people who don't really understand DE&I say this isn't about black and brown, it is about green. So it is about money and how DE&I can really help your bottom line, both internally as an organization and again, in terms of capturing that diverse market. So I'll just end kind of with this final question, which is, how can diversity, equity, and inclusion help small businesses be more profitable? And we've touched on this a little bit with some of the answers that we've given, but Kathy, why don't we start with you, since you were kind of already leading into it, but if you could just provide, kind of a synopsis of exactly what the financial translation is for DE&I, I'd love to kick it off with you.
Yeah, I really think about it in two ways. The first is your business and your employees, and the second is the markets in which you're operating. So relative to your business and your employees, I mean, the truth is, if you have a really welcoming business environment, you're going to attract the best people. I mean, you want the best people to work for you that you can find, and having a really inclusive environment where people, all kinds of people are going to be welcome. That's what you need to attract the very best employees. So it kind of starts there. And then when I think externally, I would just say the more diversity you have, and Magda talked about this a while ago, the more creative and innovative your company will be. And if the last 3 years have taught us anything, it's just that it's hard to operate a business right now. Creativity, innovation, trying new things, adapting and being nimble have never been at a higher premium. And it is proven that the more diverse your team is, the more you are able to adapt, be nimble, be innovative, and continue to grow your business. So it's I wish I could give you some names of some of these studies to prove it, but it is proven. And to me, that's the most compelling reason to do this work as a business owner.
Thank you. Magda, let's go over to you.
Yeah, I have to echo Kathy's sentiments about business. And when I consider our sector in the higher ed world, and as a community college, we're continually working toward inclusivity and diversity and changing ourselves systemically to adapt to the current environment and understanding that change needs to happen on a regular basis. We like to say that we're on a journey. And so what does that mean for our business? It means growing enrollment, right? It means more students will come through our doors if they could feel welcomed and respected and invited. And that's critical for our bottom line. So I'll just leave that there. I think from a business standpoint, it's a good return on our investment.
Right. Thank you. Nolan?
I would just, what Magda and Kathy said is spot on. And I would just leave the group with, you cannot afford not to have a diverse play or plan or reach a diverse community. The buying power of diverse communities is in the trillions, depending on the group. And I think that as our population is shifting and some groups are aging out and some groups are coming into the buying power space, I think the most recent statistic is Gen Z, 1 in 5 identify in the LGBTQ space. So that's a pretty high number when you look at your potential customer base, and the people that are in Gen Z that are allies of the LGBTQ plus community or intersectionality plays or anything of that nature. They're saying Gen Z is the most social justice forward generation our nation has ever seen. And that alone, if you are a business that may not be able, that may be afraid to not cater to a group because of the 1 or 2 vocal individuals, imagine if you didn't, and the lack of business opportunity and the lack of sales you're missing out on in terms of not catering to that. Inversely, no one wants to work at a company where they don't see themselves or they don't see the potential of feeling included. So I think internally, businesses cannot afford not to attain and attract and retain top-notch diverse talent. And externally, they cannot afford to succeed in a space where they're not willing to be a partner of diverse communities. I don't know why I said that so aggressively. I guess I'm just passionate about it. But, I'm not an aggressive person in any way, shape, or form.
Your
Just
passion is
passionate
radiating
about
through the
DE&I.
Zoom screen. Thank you. All right. Well, with that, let's see if any of our panelists have any final words as we wrap up today. I want to thank everybody for a couple of really, I think, impactful questions from the audience. I appreciate that very much. And with that, Kathy, let's start with you. Any final thoughts you have before we wrap up today?
This has been such a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it myself. I know that there's tons of resources. So as your members, Megan, consider this and think about their next steps, I just encourage everybody to reach out and learn more, take advantage of the Speakers Bureau at Tri-C or some of the other partnerships and resources we talked about today, because it's pretty much impossible to figure it out on your own.
Thank you. Magda, did you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I want to thank you too for inviting me as well to this conversation. I learned a lot from my partners here in the panel as well, and from you, Megan. And I want to thank the participants for joining us today, because the fact that you're here and interested in this conversation in itself speaks volumes. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Nolan?
Yeah, I would just quickly echo what Kathy and Magda said. Thank you, Megan, for having us, and thank you to the participants for attending. Everyone's busy. Taking an hour and a half out of your morning is not always easy to do, but your commitment to DE&I and driving your business forward and making it a better place is very admirable. I would just say too, a lot of great talking points, and I know the session's being recorded, but our conversation doesn't have to end here. I don't want to speak for all of the panelists, but if you find us on LinkedIn, want to chat with us, want to learn more. I personally am not a DE&I consultant, so I am passionate about it. I work in the space, but my time is free and I love to talk about it. So, reach out, and, if we can help your business be a more inclusive space or attract a more inclusive consumer base, I think we'd be excited to talk about it and just make, our community a better place to live and work.
Well, time that's free is the best kind of time. So thank you for that. I will certainly share LinkedIn profiles for our panelists, as long as it's okay with all of them, with today's attendees, in case you'd like to connect with them afterward. I will send a follow-up email to everybody with the links to some of the resources that were mentioned today, some of the ones that I put in the chat, and also some of the ones that were discussed that we didn't have a chance to drop in the chat. I will send some links out to some of those organizations and resources that were mentioned. I'll also send a link to the recording of today's session. So with that, I want to thank our panelists, Kathy, Dr. Gomez, Nolan. Thank you all so much for being here, for your wonderful insight and thoughts today. I want to also thank again our amazing presenting sponsors for their support so that we can make this series free and open to everyone. So thank you again to Baldwin Wallace and to Cuyahoga Community College. If you know of anybody who could benefit from attending the subsequent 4 sessions of this series, please invite them. It is available and open to anybody who would like access to this information. So please feel free to do so. Our next session will be on Tuesday, October 11th. That is actually National Coming Out Day. And we will be featuring Amanda Cole, who is the Executive Director of Plexus, the LGBT and Allied Chamber of Commerce, who's going to be talking a little bit about capturing that community. So all of the details on the rest of our sessions and our panelists is up on the Eventbrite link. You can find that there where you registered. And everybody who is attending today will get all the information, links for the subsequent 4 sessions in the series with the registration that you've already submitted. So you are good to go. All right, with that, thanks again to our panelists. Thanks to everyone for attending. Have a wonderful rest of your week, everyone. And thanks again. Bye-bye.